pastor. He's someone near and dear to my heart. I'm allowed to say this because he said it, so I'm quoting him. He is not the best man I am. He is just a quality man. That was something he said to the man who did Kayla and I's wedding. So I want to take the time to introduce the quality man. You can call him that forever now, Dylan Meyer.
Good morning. Good morning. How you guys doing? That was not believable. How you guys doing? Good. Thanks. Well, my name is Dylan Meyer. I'm a senior here at MCC. There's some younger faces in here that I don't recognize because I've been off campus for 2 years, pretty much. So that's how that goes. But I am excited to be here. I'm currently the Director of Student Ministries at Westview. And if you don't know me, you might know my wife. Her name's Olivia. She's a great gal. But that's just a little bit about me. But standing here right now reminds me of the path that I took to get here. This was a long time coming. And out of here, it's scary, but it's good. And in my reflection of that in preparation for this, I was just kind of running through a list of things that brought me to this moment since I started my career here at MCC. And so some of the things that I have accomplished. Well, my career here, it's good, a little bit of bad, and a lot of interesting. So I moved away from home. That was scary. I survived Johnson Hall. That's hard. That's hard. I lost my grandpa. That's bad. I dated someone also attending MCC. That's super hard. I had zero money. That's pretty regular. I got engaged and then married to that amazing woman, and our first year is celebrated this Sunday on February 9th. She's been married for a year to me, and she's still alive. I witnessed the rise of the hack and the death of the slab. I had a love-hate relationship with Greek. I got a job at Long John Silver's, and then I got a better job that I actually studied to do. So it's been a long path getting here, but while I was reminiscing on this, I was reminded of a specific story. My freshman year, I had a night class, Human Growth and Development, and I was in there, and one night she had, Karen Smothers was the professor, and she had us taste test baby food. And this is seared in my brain because that was an awful experience. It was truly horrible. She had all these jars lined up on this back table, and she had covered up the labels, and we were supposed to taste test, and then we were supposed to say, well, this is supposed to taste like that. And pretty much everything just tasted like mush. It looked like mush. It tasted like mush. The texture was awful, and there was practically no flavor at all. It was just nasty. And that stuck out to me because that was the warning that I received when I got here at MCC. The warning was that that would become my relationship with Christ. That would become my faith, was just this dull, mundane mush. Because we're desensitized. That is a blessing and a curse of MCC, is we spend so much time with the gospel that we become desensitized to flavors. That's why baby food is mush, because they can't handle all that flavor. But we're around it all the time, and we lose track of it. And that was the warning that I received, is that that might become my faith while I was here. That the Bible would just become simply a textbook. My devotional time with Jesus would simply become checking a box. My time at church would become more like work and less like worship. That was the warning that I received, was that my relationship would become dull, mundane, a tasteless mush. And that scared me. But slowly I saw myself fade into that very trap that many of us face. And that's exactly what happened to me. My Bible time, my time reading the Word of Christ became more like checking a box. I mean, for goodness sakes, I had to read it for every class. And we have so much reading altogether. The first time I took a York or Words class, I looked at the amount of required reading and just wept. It became more about the words than the author that wrote them. And then I started sermon classes. And all of that knowledge on how to preach a good sermon was amazing, but then I began to twist it. And I became cynical when I would go to church services. Instead of listening to what the pastor was meaning and what the Holy Spirit was speaking through him, I would just sit there and pick apart like I was doing a grading sheet in intro to preaching, and it was just, he did that wrong, he did that wrong, he did that wrong. And I became so focused on doctrine and theology that I became a schmuck, which, if you guys remember Dr. Ware's view, he's a great guy. That was how he started every theology class, was don't be a schmuck. And that became me. I was so critical of other people's theology. If it didn't line up with exactly what I thought, I just wrote him off as a heretic. It became more about my competency, ability, and performance than about what Jesus was doing through me. It became more and more about me and less about him. It was about my knowledge, my theology, my ability to preach sermons, my academics. It was about a grade. I fell into that trap. My faith slowly faded to a dull mush, tasteless and mundane. And this last weekend, I was at a men's conference, and God ministered to me in an amazing way. It started out with conviction. I began to realize that my relationship with God had become more about me and more about my career than about him. And we were reading in Luke, and I was wondering, what am I going to preach on for my senior sermon? And the words almost jumped off the page as I looked at Luke chapter 14, verse 34 and 35. It says, salt is good, but if it has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is of no use either for the soil or for the manure pile. It is thrown away. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. I had lost my flavor. That's what I came here for, was to be the salt. I came here with such a hunger to do God's work, with such big goals and such high hopes. And many of us know what it feels like to lose our flavor, or you know someone who is there right now. I want you guys to think of a name. And be careful, because it might be you. It's definitely, it was me. I wondered, what does that look like? I examined my life in that moment. What does this moment feel like? What does it feel like to have my flavor gone? I was overwhelmed. I felt isolated and hidden in the dark. I felt fearful and stuck. And this is the exact reason that I came here, is to avoid this. Because the name that comes to mind when I think of that person that had lost his salt was a youth minister I had in high school. He ministered to me and my older brother, but he lost his salt and fell to moral failure and was fired from the church. And the faith of my other brother left when he did. The Matthew account of this passage says that we are called to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. That's what I came here to do. That's what I came here to be. I wanted to be the youth minister that got it right. I wanted to be the person that when people encountered, they felt the love of Christ because I had that salt. I had that light. That's what I wanted. And I began to wonder, how did I lose sight of that? And then God told me, it was never about you. Because God is the good. God is the light. God is the flavor. It's not me, it's Him in me. And I lost sight of that because I was losing sight of Him. And I thought back to that calling, that moment that I decided I want to be the salt of the earth. That was the moment that I felt called. I began to wonder, what good am I to that call if I'm not salty? What good am I to the call to be the light if I don't have His light in me? What good am I if I'm not salty? But to be thrown out on the ground, as Matthew says, and trampled. Or as Luke says, not useful for soil or manure. I grew up on a farm. I know what manure is. But then from that moment, then, okay, God's beginning to minister to me in this moment. He's speaking His gospel back into me. And I need that. I need His salt. I need His light. But how do I keep it? How do I stay salty? How do I remain in that? And Jesus began to minister to me in those moments through the people around me. And there are three things that God did in those moments that refreshed His gospel in me. The first thing is He made it personal. God made it personal again. I was sitting there, and I was looking at someone next to me that I remember vividly seeing on Christmas Eve service. Christmas Eve service, I was looking at this guy. I sit in the front rows of the church, and I kind of sit there so I can scan and look at people and stalk them and, people watch. And Christmas Eve service, I saw this guy, big burly guy with a nice mohawk, and he was sitting there, and he was just weeping as the message was being told. And he was hugging his daughter and just falling apart. And I remember leaning over to my wife Lydia and saying, wow, what a blessing it is to see the gospel fall on fresh ears. And then I was sitting next to this guy at this men's conference. We're going to call him Jay because I don't want to tell you his full name, but he had been through the ringer. He had spent his better part of 2 years in prison. He had been addicted to meth. He was a rough guy. He had a mohawk that used to be dyed purple, kind of missed the purple. And he was talking to me, and I just got to know him. And he was telling me that he's a power lifter, and he just really wants to bench 405 one more time before he turns 50. And I'm thinking, man, I have a lot in common with this guy. But again, at Men's Encounter, which is now months away from Christmas Eve, as the message was preached, he began to weep again and again and again, every time. I wonder, what is it with this guy? Doesn't he know Jesus loves him? And that's the moment that it clicked. It was personal to him. It wasn't just a Jesus loves me moment. It was a genuine Jesus can really love me. That was sinking into his bones for the first time over and over and over. And that is the moment that I had missed. See, I know because I came to a Christian college that Jesus universally loves you. He loves every one of us. And sometimes I would just assume that that's everybody but me. I would fall into that lie. But in these moments, looking at Jay, it became personal again. Jesus' grace, his love, was genuinely for me. And some of my saltiness was restored. And then the second thing was God made it new. He made it new. So often I have a spiritual encounter and then I pray over and over and over again, God, give me that again. Give me that same thing again. It was so good. And then somebody told me once, pray for something new. So I think of it like this. I have clothes that I've had since I was in like junior high. And I love them. They are my favorite clothes. When I wore them like every day of my 8th grade year. I washed them, of course. But I wore them all the time. But now, I'm a senior in college. Those clothes don't fit anymore. I try to wear them as undershirts and stuff, and my wife's trying to throw them in the trash. I have a pair of shoes that I call the white Nikes. They have survived so many things. I've had them since I was a junior in high school. They are brown. There's holes in the toes. The back is just completely bent over. There's practically a hole in the bottom of the shoe. See, God grows us, and He gives us what we need in the season that we need. And sometimes He calls us to move into something new. Move into a new portion of His grace, a new portion of His love. Because there's so much to it. Sometimes He wants us to do something new with Him. And the third thing is God made it holy. See, we know what holy is. It's set apart. It's called out. It's lifted up. We know what the word means, but as He did that, He began to take my devotional time that had become so casual, and He lifted it up. He made it special instead of just another thing. And one thing that helped me understand this was every time I leave the house, or to be honest, every time I leave the presence of my wife, I turn my head back and go, I love you, and I walk out the door. And she knows I love her. But again, when I was at Men's Encounter, they challenged people in our lives to write us letters, and I got a letter from my wife. And that was special. Because she always says, I love you, right back. And I know it. She genuinely loves me. But she took time, probably 10 minutes, 15 minutes at least, to write me a letter, genuinely describing who I am and why she loves me for that person. That wasn't just an I love you moment. It was special. It was holy. And as I began to apply that to my time with Jesus, I began to see that it was special. It was holy. It was set apart. It was lifted up. And again, some of my saltiness was restored. And then I got to experience the good stuff. Because when we see that we can only be salty if Jesus is sprinkling His salt on us, then we get to be the salt. Then we get to be the light. And what does that look like? That means that the overwhelmed feeling that I was once feeling before was now overwhelmed by the feeling of His grace and His love. The isolation and darkness was now filled with a community of light that had already been around me, speaking His truth into me. That fear was no longer fear, but a fearlessness for His truth, His gospel, His love. And that's what we were called to be. That is what we are. What does it look like to be salty? We have a peace under the weight of deadlines, under the weight of all of the things that we face in this time in life. We have a peace, a grace. We have a hope in the struggles that we face. We can become a community that is on fire. We don't have to be held down anymore. These are simple gospel truths, but they still reign true. We just have to grab hold of them, because it all starts with Him. If we are going to minister to the other people around us, we have to let Jesus minister to us, because He has to make us salty for us to be the salt to everyone else. I want you guys to think of someone in your life that has been the salt to you. I have several names I can think of. Floyd Hammond. He was an older fellow at my church in high school, and every time I walked in the door, he would look at me and I'd say, Floyd, how you doing? He said, terrible. But you could see the twinkle in his eye. He was kidding. Because he was old and he had pain, but he had something deep in his bones. And it was the love of Christ. He was salty. He was the light. Steve, I'm pretty sure he's a prophet. Every time I talk to him, he just speaks such wisdom into me. He speaks God's truth. Sue, this little bitty lady I know now, she is only about this tall, but God has packed so much dynamite in that tiny little body. She is just bursting with his love and his boldness. Olivia, my wife, who continuously speaks God's grace and God's truth into me. And I had the opportunity at Men's Encounter to be the salt of the earth to Jay. Because they preached a message on what it is to be a father to your children and to be a godly man. And he has 2 daughters, and again, he just began to weep. And I put my hand on his shoulder, and I looked at him in the eyes and said, "You are a good father." And he could care less what I had to say. And that's okay, because he wasn't listening to me. Those were the words that Christ had been speaking into his life for the last 49 years, and he just hadn't been able to hear it. Because I allowed God to minister to me in that moment, and then for him to speak through me. There was such tremendous life spoken into this guy. That's what it is to be the salt of the earth. But it has to start with Jesus. That's what it is. He speaks to us, and then we have the blessing to share that, to speak that onto those around us. Don't fall into the trap of letting this become something that is dull and mundane and tasteless. Let him continue to speak his gospel truth into your life, because he genuinely loves you. And he genuinely cares about you. And that is something that is special. Just because we know it doesn't mean it has any less weight. But it has to start with Jesus. He has to remain in here before he can go anywhere else. And so, let Jesus be your flavor. Be salty.